Hello, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Srochi and the King. Our fifth episode, I believe, is the count. It is Sunday, November 7th, 2021. Early day for you, Adam. It was daylight savings over here, so we changed our schedule up a tiny bit. How are you feeling this morning?
I'm okay. I'm pretty tired, but I've got the day off work today, so I figured I can have a sleep during the day if I need to. And I did
Yeah,
notice your hat, so
that's true. Thank you for
yeah.
pointing that out. It's
So
very
I
it's
know
been a very
you've sort of
special
had
week.
you've had a bit of a different week to what you would usually have, and that hat has probably got something to do with it.
For those of you not watching right now, I am wearing an Atlanta Braves championship hat. This is they won the World Series this past week, and it was, as an Atlanta sports fan, diehard, the first championship I've ever gotten to witness in person. So yeah, my suffering is finally over. I can now confidently say that the curse was not me being born for Atlanta sports, because basically that lines up with the last time an Atlanta team won a championship in '95. I was born in '94, so it was. I think I can confidently say that personal curse is over. I now get to know what it's like to be a champion. Me, of course, personally, I had a lot to do with the proceedings. But that was a ton of fun. Big week. Got to go to a championship parade too, and just get blasted with confetti and champagne, just kind of like, from the players off the parade float. It was a very eventful week for an Atlanta sports fan. Really, the city kind of lit up. It was pretty cool to see that happen for the first time.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it was. So now you'd be hoping the Hawks can maybe do
No,
something similar this year.
now that the curse might be lifted, maybe we'll see DeAndre Hunter for that full playoff run. Maybe we'll see DeLon Wright get minutes over Lou Williams, God willing. there's there's not the ideal start to the season, but it is still very early on, in that respect, and hopefully that Braves juju goes over to the Hawks side of things. But you know what? It is, that being said, it is early in the season, Adam. But at the same time, 3 weeks in, we have like decent sample sizes on things now in terms of rotations, player minutes, like breakout bust candidates and stuff of that nature. Like, we kind of get to see a real glimpse of where guys have either accelerated and developed or regressed so far this season. And today's theme will sort of touch on that. Adam and I, throughout the course of the season, we're going to be revisiting predictions that we made in the offseason and just kind of talking through our logic then and how we, apply that now to sort of the results that we've seen. Today, we're going to talk about players that Adam and I identified as draft busts, or just guys who are being overdrafted, and can take a look at some of these names through the first 3 weeks of the season and just see whether or not we were on target, on the money. More to come. We'll just analyze where we are at this point and whether or not we still hold those predictions that we made to be true. Of course, as always on Srochi and the King, though, before we dive into our main topic, we set the table with some of the top line stories of the week, and we will start with that with the return of a pretty familiar face. Pascal Siakam today is making his return to the Raptors lineup. He had shoulder surgery in the offseason. He had missed all games for the Raptors up to this point. The Raptors have looked a lot better to start this year than they did most of last season. Probably attribute that to not being in Tampa Bay, at least somewhat. But, a rejuvenated Raptors team getting an injection of debatably their second best player. Adam, with Siakam coming back, what's the read fantasy-wise here? Because his presence is going to have a wide range of implications across this roster.
Yeah, look, I think it probably impacts everyone to some degree, whether it's in a good way or in a bad way. I think probably the guy that's least affected is Fred VanVleet, because I don't think he relies. He's not a huge scorer. Like that's not his number one category by any means. So I think having Siakam there, his assist rate could potentially go up slightly. So I'm not worried about him at all. OG probably a little bit, because he has been scoring the ball really well, so he might lose a shot or two. Obviously, though, it's it's how the big man rotation sort of looks moving forward. And they've already announced that Siakam is starting today and Precious Achiuwa is going to the bench. So Scotty Barnes obviously has done enough to lock in his starting spot. I don't know who the center is. Is it? I'm not sure whether you would say it's Siakam or Barnes, or they're just sort of running 3 forwards. It's
possible.
probably, yeah. I mean, technically, you've got to have a center, I suppose, but a lot of teams don't nowadays, obviously. So Achiuwa and Birch both lose a lot of value here. So it will be interesting to see who they go with first, coming off the bench there, whether it is Achiuwa, and he has been starting, so he would be the obvious choice, but they could very well sort of get Birch off the bench first, and then Chris Boucher, who one of the more polarizing, I don't know if that's the right word, fantasy players.
There seems to be a lot of opinions kind of going in one direction these days.
Yeah.
Understandably, given his current role and production in these minutes. I mean, he's in danger of falling out of the rotation entirely here. I mean, he's down to 13 minutes per game on a regular basis, and it appears that he's behind both Achiuwa and Birch in this rotation. I mean, what's your read on Boucher's role in particular? Like, do you think that there's a chance that he might be done in Toronto as an effective rotation player, or do you think that he still has too much talent to bench?
Oh, it's really hard to know. I've been waiting for Siakam to come back to actually make a sort of I guess an educated call on it, because potentially they could just take Birch or Achiuwa out of the rotation here. You don't know what's going to happen, and I mean, Boucher is familiar with their systems, and he has looked okay when he's been on the court. His minutes have just trended down a little bit, which hasn't been ideal. So look, we're still preaching that you should try and hold him if possible, but I get that it's been pretty rough at the moment. So, look, they're the early game, I think, today. They tip off maybe in about an hour, don't they?
Yeah, a little bit so, against the Brooklyn Nets, which is a team that you could play small against, just given how they go. So maybe that's why. I mean, maybe that's why we get to see this particular starting rotation with Siakam effectively being their center to kick things off. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if it's a matchup-based thing. But Nurse also is someone who really relies on his top 5, no matter the matchup, in terms of just minutes played. And, this could just be how things go. But I mean, I agree that this is still, if you still have been holding through Boucher through this whole experience, the ups and downs, this is absolutely the time that you still hold on and really evaluate where, where he's going to be at effectively the rest of the year. Because, I mean, it doesn't look good just from the outside, just like objectively. Just you have a full guy who competes for his minutes, who's just more talented, is going to come in and probably siphon some stuff off there, but you never know. This is kind of where you evaluate things. For me, the other 2 elements that I'm definitely going to be keeping a watchful eye on over the next week or two is Ananovi's shot output. He's averaging 18.8 per game right now as sort of their lead guy offensively, and he's excelled in that role to be sure. I mean, it's quite possible he still leads the team in shot attempts, but I am curious to see how that shakes out. And then Scotty Barnes' minutes, who he's been terrific to start the year as well, but he also just kind of seems like the odd man out in this rotation, just in terms of minute shares. Like, he could probably still get to high 20s per game. At like a minimum, I think that he's earned that, but I'm curious if he, what happens. He's averaging 35 per game up to this point. I'm curious what happens with that, with Siakam back in the fold. And then, that center rotation, it remains to be seen. But the Raptors are competitive. They will be more so now that Siakam's back in the fold, presumably. So it'll be interesting to see, winning basketball does dictate a lot of this stuff too, of like who you prioritize playing out there. That is, definitely something to keep an eye on over the next several games. Let's talk about another team. The Raptors are kind of on the way up. Let's talk about a team that's been trending down to start this season, though. The Boston Celtics kind of made some headlines this week. The ones that are typically fodder for NBA Twitter discussion. Finger pointing, blame game, all that kind of stuff. There was, they're off to a 4-6 start to start the season. The defense has been pretty good, honestly, but the topic of conversation was about the offense and how there's been a whole lot of Jaylen Brown isolations, Jason Tatum isolations. Marcus Smart, after a loss, called both of those guys out about how they don't pass the ball enough. Now, granted, the team's like passing numbers, assists numbers, like they're all on the whole just down to start the season. The offense has really not figured things out quite yet, but it's undeniable too, just when you watch these games, that these two have there have always been some concerns about how these two mesh as 1A, 1B type of stars, and it's been more the conversations around that have been more prominent this year than ever, particularly with Tatum having a pretty rough start to the season. I think he's number 64 in 9-cat leagues this year. Now, what do you feel about, what is your take on what we've seen out of Boston so far this season? Is there something that you feel is inherently wrong with their setup? Like, is their roster construction just not built to be an effective offensive? I don't know, just to be an effective offense in today's league. I mean, because they do run a lot of bigs. Do you think there's not enough passing? I mean, what have you seen so far from them?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I was pretty excited about Boston this year. I thought sort of expectations weren't where they had been the last couple of years, and I thought that was probably a good situation for them to be in. Mm-hmm. I think Horford's been a nice fit. He's probably been the success story of the season for them. He has sort of slowed down a little bit over the last couple of games, which was to be expected. Robert Williams, I think, has been fine. He's sort of been what we thought he would be. He's a bit up and down in the scoring, but the rebounds and blocks are typically there, with the steals as well. So it's really the sort of that backcourt rotation that's been the issue. Tatum was really good yesterday against the Mavs, so I think that's hopefully the start of him turning things around. His shot looked a lot better. He was attacking the basket a little bit more. Smart hasn't been good. I know he's called out these guys for not passing and that sort of thing, but
he's got to be able to hit some shots to
that's right, passes. Yeah. And I think I'm just looking at, so he's the 134th ranked player this season, and yeah, look, I think that just shows you, like, I mean, he's been sort of one of these guys who's generally seen as a bit undervalued in fantasy, coming off the bench, really good at steals and assists and threes. Looking at his numbers this year, I mean, the steals are there. He's over 2 steals a game, so that's elite. You're not going to complain about that. Nothing else is good at all. I mean, if I drag across and have a look at positives and negatives, I would say he's, the only other category, he's barely a positive in assists, and he's the one calling out players for not passing the ball. So
his numbers are down from last year too. Like, averages like 5.7 assists per game last season for him, and it's just down to flat 4 at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that has to do with other guys not hitting shots. Obviously, that the assist takes 2 people. So yeah, look, I don't know. I thought Smart was probably going to be a pretty good option for them starting at point guard, but it hasn't looked. It just hasn't looked cohesive. Whether it's a new coach and a new role for Smart. They've got a couple of sort of, Josh Richardson is a new piece to what they're trying to do as well. So I mean, it hasn't looked good, but it is still early. So I'm still sort of, I'm confident they can be better than what they have been. And I sort of had them as probably as a playoff team, but down around that sort of 7, 8, 9. Spot, and I'm still pretty confident they can get there once players start hitting their straps. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't been nice at all, and I've got a couple of Celtics fans who are pretty frustrated with everything that's happening and some of Smart's decision making, which I don't know if you caught the game against the Mavericks yesterday, but it was level. It was 104 all, I think, with, 16 seconds to go. Mavericks only had 9 seconds on the shot clock. So let them take their shots, see what happens. Smart fouled and gave them a new shot clock so that they were able to then run the last play of the game, and we know what happened. It wasn't so. It was an interesting decision. I don't know why you would take that foul there, despite having a foul to give. Wouldn't you rather have the ball in your hands to close the game than putting the fate or the result in the other team's hands? It was and from what I heard, Celtics Twitter weren't too happy with with his decision there in the final few seconds.
Nor should they be. I mean, that's always been a criticism of Smart throughout his career, is that, call it overconfidence or just questionable decision making. But like in most respects, I mean, he's always been a terrific defender, a little bit of a gambler. It kind of comes with the territory, I suppose, but erratic shot taker, been known to jack up threes early in the clock, or just with not enough separation created for him on defense and something like that, or just through the flow of the offense. I mean, and I was a little down on Boston this year because, and not that I'm taking victory laps because it's still early, but I sort of felt that this lack of a genuine, there was no clear direction on who really runs this offense. It's not Tatum. I mean, a lot of it flows through him, but he's not. They just didn't have any real playmakers. I just never felt that Smart is or was a true point guard. Bringing in Al Horford helps. He and Robert Williams are both pretty decent playmakers, but Dennis Schroeder is another guy who I watched plenty of him in Atlanta and in these other stops elsewhere. He's very similar to Smart offensively, and just those two work better as individual. He's a very isocentric player too. I don't know if he's going to be their solution to sort of see, to grease the wheels on that offense. Do you feel like there's any guys that we could see step up, particularly with Jaylen Brown set to miss a good amount of time with this hamstring injury in particular? Do you feel that we might see a guard emerge here and take on a larger role, like Schroeder, like Peyton Pritchard, perhaps Neesmith or Josh Richardson? Any of those guys?
No, look, I think, yesterday obviously was, I think this is a good opportunity for Tatum to get things going, because he's option 1A and 1B on offense now pretty much. So, and he was really good yesterday. So I think he just gets a bit more of a green light here for the next couple of weeks. I think Schroeder is probably the guy. Obviously, he started yesterday, so he probably is the obvious one who gets the bump. But Josh Richardson played 30 minutes and he looked okay. I still don't think he's going to be sort of a must add sort of guy that you've got to run out and grab, but he might be worth just picking up for a couple of games to see what happens. We know he's a good defender, so he might be able to give you a block and a steal and a three for the next 2 weeks, which can be valuable. And then I think I don't know, it could be Neesmith, it could be Langford, it could be Pritchard. I think they'll just go with whoever's got the hot hand on the night, rather than sort of going in with a specific strategy, because all three of them can score. So for me, there's not really a guy that was sort of not on the radar at all who's all of a sudden this must add player. Richardson would be the one that I would consider picking up.
I think I would be in that camp as well. This would be, he does seem like the logical fit, at least just, particularly defensively, but also is just sort of a connector on offense. Is a guy who can, there's an avenue for him to really sort of get things going here. So he's the one to keep a closer eye on over the next couple of weeks, where, we kind of wait for another update on Brown. The last story doesn't have a whole lot new to it. It is just a continuation of something that we've been following. Of course, it's this ongoing saga in New Orleans with the Zion Williams injury. We got an update earlier this week that Zion is now going to be reevaluated again in 2 to 3 weeks, and that is to start practicing. That's not like a return date either. So the timeline continues to get pushed back. At this point, the earliest that we could project Zion returning to the floor could be sometime in mid-December. Maybe that'd be the most optimistic projection there, but I don't know. The more we hear, the more the less likely things seem. I've sounded off plenty about my detest for how New Orleans as an organization has handled the messaging around this. And we don't have to dwell on this for too long because at least on that aspect of it, because we want to keep things fantasy focused here, and I don't want to just turn this into the David Griffin rag on hour. But I don't know. But briefly, do you feel optimistic about Zion playing half of his games this season? We could just start with that.
What do we? No, I just had a glance at numbers and stuff where we are. Look, no, I would say I'm sort of in line with what you said there. I think probably best case he's back before Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that is as you've said, they don't verbalize anything or communicate anything really. So maybe that is a sort of a tentative date they've got in their head that he'll be back for Christmas or the New Year.
Yeah.
But even then, when he comes back, it's who's to say he plays every game? He'll probably sit back to backs. He'll be limited for 3 weeks. I think it's pretty clear they're not making the playoffs. Well, based on what we've seen thus far, they're not making the playoffs.
I'm not optimistic. I don't think there's anyone who really is, to be honest.
No. So I'm not. You can't drop him because he's just too good. You could try and trade him, but I don't know. Like, you're not going to get much back for him. I think you just have to ride it out and hope that he does come back and he plays. But then there's all the rumors about that he's not happy in New Orleans and that sort of thing. So I don't know. It's just a mess. And I'm glad I didn't draft it. I did get him in a few best ball leagues, but I didn't actually draft him in any of my weekly or daily changes leagues, which I'm pretty happy about.
I got him in one roto spot, which might be a mistake. He drops to the mid 80s range. I'm just like, okay. At that point, I'm like, I'll take the shot. Maybe the time, because at that time the only information we had was that he was going to be reevaluated about a week from that point.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, hey, maybe I'll get lucky. I have not to this point. So I'm just going to sit on that grenade on my bench for a little while. Thankfully, it's, because it's roto, there will be a moment whenever he can come back. I can maybe cash in some value on that, but it's not looking optimistic. Best of luck, New Orleans fans. I'm sure you'll find something, some glimmer of hope at some point. I know it's not been easy, though. To this point of the season. Anyway, a great transition presents itself here. We're going to talk about overdrafted players checking in on them. Zion, we could just go ahead and just say he fits that bucket, but it doesn't really. There's not a whole lot of analysis that we need to give you to make that one clear. But yeah, Adam and I are going to talk about players that we were sort of urging people to perhaps, I don't know, pass on, slow their roll on a little bit, and we're going to hold our own feet to the fire. We're going to see whether or not we were on the money or not. Again, this is pretty early on. This is still first impression stuff, and there's plenty of games left to really solidify things here. But this offers a nice sort of opportunity, this sample size that we've seen, to get a sense of where things are shaking out. So, Adam, let's just hop in and start with the first. We're going to try and hit the top 50 players that were drafted in 9-cat leagues this year. The ADP information on these charts are provided by Brewski 150. If you haven't seen that, you haven't checked out the Hoopball Premium stuff, great opportunity to go check some of that stuff out. You get resources from historical resources like this, tons of articles and all that good stuff, Discord access. I'll stop pitching. But we will, that's where some of this info has come from. So we're just going to take a look at these ADPs and see if we're on the mark. And I'll lead things off, Adam. Because if y'all have seen any of the videos that I did in the offseason, I did one on draft steals and busts. My first round bust was Luka Doncic, who I thought was going too high, as I have the previous couple of years, and I get it. This is points league influence. This is name recognition influence. Like, Luka is a guy that everyone wants on their fantasy teams. In theory, he sounds like the perfect fantasy player. But what us over at Hoopball and plenty of other sites have been sort of banging the drum on for a while now, Luka has pretty significant holes in his category leagues game, with both percentages and high turnovers and okay defensive stats, but not strong enough to offset the big holes that he burns into those three particular categories. Now, to this point of the season, as you can see here, he was being chosen anywhere within those top 4 picks most frequently between Jokic, Steph Curry, and Giannis. And to this point of the season, that advice I gave has proven to be effective. And I know this is sort of precarious. This is interesting timing because I know he just hit that game winner last night and he's looked pretty good. But Luka's averaging less points this year than he did last season through 9 games. It's at 24.9, 2.3 3-pointers. Threes across the league are down, but Luka's are as well. The boards and assists are still there, but the percentages are, and the turnovers in particular, are still burning holes into your team. And Adam, I don't know about you, but I think he'll be better than top 70. I still feel very confident that Luka's not going to be a top 10 fantasy player in 9-cat leagues this year. Where are you on that?
Yeah, look, he's the name that stands out on this list as well for me, along with Giannis, I think. And yeah, look, points leagues, as you said, it does sway the ADPs quite a bit. And in points league, that's absolutely fine, but for both of those. And I think just with head-to-head or category leagues, if you're punting, then this is absolutely fine. But with Luka, you'd have to be punting a few different categories. You'd have to be punting assists, not assists, steals, blocks, free throw percentage, potentially field goal percentage, turnovers. That's a lot of punting to get him up into that range. So too high for me. But I mean, people have their guys that they like. So that also sort of sways this a little bit. And yeah, Luka's, I mean, he came in, I know I posted a thing on Twitter a couple of days ago about early season busts, and Luka was up there and he was the 90th ranked player. He's now the 70th ranked player just after that game yesterday. So we are still early enough that if he puts a few good games together, he could very easily jump up inside the top 30. But I don't see him getting anywhere close to this unless you are punting a few categories.
In particular, of the categories of his that are down compared to last year, between points, threes, and assists in particular, like he's averaging about 3 less points per game, about half a 3 less per game, and probably most notably, nearly 2 assists less per game. Do you feel that are any of those like red flags to you? The assists to me sort of stand out because I know that Jason Kidd he's running with pretty deep rotations, and he is deferred to having more of an egalitarian offense, I think. Less emphasis on Luka kind of controlling everything. Do you feel that there's a cause for concern with any of those 3 categories?
Not concern. I mean, I think his assists being down is something we're seeing across the league, and that maybe then links in just to the amount of players that are having issues with the new ball or whatever it might be. So they're not shooting, their percentages are down. So I'm not too worried about it. I think with Porzingis back, that'll help him as well in terms of his assist numbers. So I think they'll come back up a little bit. 3-pointers is an interesting one for me because he's viewed as this guy who hits all these threes and crazy, and he does hit some crazy threes with sort of 3 defenders on him and that sort of thing. But if you actually look at his game log, he's only hit more than 3 threes once this year, and that was yesterday or last night. So with the way the league is now, basically everyone shoots threes. It's not actually a strength for him. He's a slight positive in 3-pointers, and that's it. Where I think some people think, oh yeah, he hits all these threes and that's one of his real strengths, but it's not. So just, I think, something to factor in when you're valuing him. So no, look, I mean, he's been off to a slow start as well. So I think his points and assists will go up a little bit. But they are also running a lot of Jalen Brunson alongside him. He's sort of carved out that 6-man role, and he actually closed the game last night. So having him on the court, I think, takes the ball out of Doncic's hands a little bit as well. So something else to just consider.
Yeah, well, we'll check back in on that. I mean, I think you and I agree, though. No matter what, there's just very few scenarios where Luka. I mean, not that he's dug himself into an insurmountable hole. I think it was just always kind of a guarantee that he was never going to hit his ADP. So I still feel confident about, as I'm sure you do, about that offseason suggestion. Well, let's take a look at the second round here. Here, or not really the second round, the next 10 players on this list here. Adam, I'll kick it to you. Who on this list was someone that you were sort of sounding alarm bells on being overdrafted, and have you been proven right to this point?
So probably there's probably three, I would say, just having a quick look there. LeBron, I just never draft LeBron. I think he's always overvalued. But to his credit, he has had a really good year so far. I don't actually know where he ranks.
I think he's 10 on 9 cat per game last I checked. Like, actually, to this point, on a per game basis, he has met this value. But of course, he's going to be missing a lot of time now, or not a lot, but he's got the injuries are starting to pile up more and more for him as the years go on, and he's going to miss more time than he already has for sure.
Yeah. So he probably is, doing what he needs to do at the moment, but we know he's out for the next week. So he's just not a guy that I sort of went near. Vucevic is the next one. He's down around around 60th, I think. And this was way too high for me, 15. I was okay getting him sort of back end of the second round, so sort of mid 20s, which I think is probably, maybe even that's a bit high, just having watched them. But I think for him, in line with a few of these other guys like Lillard and Tatum and that sort of thing, I think he just needs to get his shot going, because he's getting a lot of open looks, probably more open looks than he's had in his career. He's just not hitting his shots. What's his percentages? Till they're down 38% from the field. He's not going to shoot 38% from the field.
Almost certainly not.
No, I mean he's not like these Robert Williams, Rudy Gobert guys that'll shoot 65%, because he doesn't get a lot of dunks and that sort of thing. So he is taking a lot more mid-range shots and perimeter shots. So, but I mean, you get his percentages back up to conservatively, I think you could say he'll get back up to 45%, 46%.
I think so.
And that brings him up a couple of rounds straight away. So he's probably another guy that was going a bit high, and then Zion is the other one, but we don't need to talk too much about him. We covered him earlier. So what about you? Are you anyone else there that?
Yeah, I mean, you were right on the money. LeBron was probably a guy that I would have just recommended people steer away from in non-cat leagues, because it's very similar to Luka. He's just someone whose name and counting stats outweigh his actual category league production. Trae Young, is another guy who is got that name recognition and is given a boost because of his ability to rack up points and assists, which are two categories that are very difficult to come by. And he's been fine, at least in the assists category this year. But we've seen, similar to Luka, the scoring numbers are down for him. The 3-point output is down. There's a lot has been made about the free throw rate falling for Trae this year. That used to be one of if not his strongest categorical strength, was how often he got to the line. It's down from like 8.5 attempts to about 5.5 to 6 this year, which is a pretty significant drop off. So I wasn't like gung ho about not overdrafting Trae, because I do understand trying to solidify his strengths early on, but it's proven to this point. I mean, Trae has never been a top 15 player in 9 category leagues, and it's almost assuredly not going to happen again this year. I was not, frankly, I was cool with Vucevic getting drafted where he was, and perhaps that is where I can have my first about face as a part of this year, because he is definitely, like, the usage has definitely been down. I am optimistic that he'll turn things around, because just taking a look at his last 6 seasons in the NBA, I mean, when he was the man in Orlando, his field where he was the primary offensive option, he was shooting at a minimum 47% from the floor. So your conservative estimate of 45 to 46%, I think I would say my conservative estimate would be a little higher than that, even, just because of his I just can't imagine that this is just going to uphold itself all year. And at a certain point, more and more attention is going to be given to Levine and DeRozan in particular. I think that once the defense, he will find his openings at a certain point, and he'll definitely turn things around. But he probably won't hit this valuation. So that is, that's really all I'd say here about these guys. I would have advocated drafting pretty much all of these other guys, maybe not Levine, but pretty much all these other guys where their ADPs were in the offseason. Let's take a look at the next 10 players on our list here. Obviously, some obvious names that pop out: Kyrie Irving with an ADP of 22. That is an issue that's still yet to resolve itself, which it appears it's not going to be Kyrie resolving it. It will probably have to resolve itself at this point, be that like a change in New York law or I guess retirement. It seems to be one of the two options for Kyrie at the moment. But yeah, obviously he has not hit his valuation. One guy that I was hammering home about being overdrafted, and I'm not even going to take credit for this because I just think it was like a layup, was Russell Westbrook. ADP of 24, not even remotely close to that. What Westbrook's been outside the top 150, I'm pretty sure, on the season. You can check me if I'm wrong on that. Maybe I'm a little too down. But this was always – Westbrook starts seasons slower and slower every season. He's a new point guard in a new town. That in itself is always just going to lead to a reduction in value. I don't think Westbrook has hit a top 25 valuation in 9 category leagues since the season that he won MVP. So, I mean, there was just no argument to make for drafting him here unless you were in a points league or unless you were trying to get all 3 of the Lakers stars with your first 3 picks. I mean, that's just you're a diehard Laker fan. I mean, like, I don't know. The Westbrook thing, it was too easy to telegraph. So that one's held true. But another name here that I maintained was being overdrafted, yet had at this point of the season has actually been kind of in that range still, is Devin Booker here. Down on the bottom, he's ranked number 30. He was being drafted in the 30s, and in 9 cat leagues this year, he's currently 34. I'll have to pull up the numbers again just to dig into the reasons why. But I mean, Phoenix as a whole has sort of returned value on their top guys. Booker in particular, I think that his numbers aren't wildly different from last year, but there is some value in that because of how assists, threes, and points have sort of dropped league wide. Booker's averages are still relatively the same as they were last year, so he just by maintaining some consistency to this point of the season, he's a pretty valuable player. Do you think that is something that's going to hold throughout the rest of the year, Adam, or do you project that just by virtue of other players figuring their shots out and points, threes, and assists going up as a result? Do you think he falls because of that, or do you think that this consistency is valuable?
I think he probably falls a little bit as other players work things out and slide ahead of him. It was probably a fraction high for me, but I mean, there are those guys that you need to get. If you want them, you need to reach for them and take them. And he's probably one of those guys. I think he's probably what you said. He's 34th at the moment, or something like that. So I think he's probably closer to, I don't know, back end of the 4th round, sort of around 50, 45, 50. I think he's probably where he'll settle in. So he was one of the guys on Westbrook. I'm not going to talk about Westbrook. I don't need to.
I think you covered that.
Yeah. And then probably for me, the other one, I mean, this is about where I was on him, but I am a little bit concerned, and that's Michael Porter Jr. I'm still hoping that he can turn it around because I've got him in a few spots. The injury yesterday didn't look good. I don't think, unless we got word overnight while I was asleep on severity or anything like that, I don't think we've got an update on what it was, but it was a non-contact sort of thing. It was unless it happened prior to that.
It appears that it's a back issue. I remember there was reports that he left because of a quad issue, but from what I know, I think what's come out since is that it's a back soreness thing, which obviously is a giant red flags when it comes to Porter Jr. But there's no update on what's actually like a time frame that's going to be out for, what the certain issue is. It seems like there's a lot of precautionary stuff right now.
Yeah, and I think just having a look at how he reacted and how, sort of that he reached. I mean, the reason they said it was a quad was because he reached for his upper leg sort of thing. and trying to. I mean, whenever guys go down with these injuries, I try to, because having played a lot of basketball, not at that level, obviously, but having played for 30 years, you get a lot of injuries. So you are somewhat familiar with certain injuries and how long they might be out, that sort of thing. Watching how he reached for it, and I have a feeling it's just a bit of a tweak, and he might miss one or two games, and I'm crossing my fingers that this is the case. But when I get a back injury like that, which probably for me is a bit more of an old man injury now, as opposed to a sports specific injury, yeah, I think he's probably just tweaked it and just like if you've had a back injury, you know how they stop you doing everything, even if it's just a minor back thing. You basically you're out of action until it's right. So it's not one that, and I think we saw that with Porzingis. His back injury was deemed nothing serious, but he still missed 5 games because of it. It's not one of those injuries that you can sort of ramp up slowly from or anything like that. It's just it's not right, and then it's right. So a little bit tough to know, but in terms of rankings, yeah, I mean he's way down. Obviously, I think he's 180th or something. So I'm hoping he can get back up close to this value, but I've probably got him now down around where Booker is, to be honest, around 45, something like that.
Yeah, and look, I mean, look, I was beating the drum that Michael Porter Jr. was going to excel in this role, and it's like not looking likely that he's going to exceed his ADP. I still have some optimism that he will be able to ramp up to a point where he can at least hit it. And perhaps, I mean, if this has been something that he's been just been lingering throughout the year, maybe that has some explanations to like why he's been a little non-aggressive on offense, why the shot's just been way off from what we've seen in the past. It'll be interesting to see what health updates we get on him going forward, because the more we learn about this, it could provide some answers for why he's underperformed at this point, and obviously, of course, where we go from here, how many times, when he'll be able to get back onto the court and be his old self again. So yeah, that's it for those 21 through 30 players. The next 10, we have a couple of interesting names. I found this to be a very difficult. I thought that most of the guys in this range were being drafted at pretty fair places, but the one guy that stood out like sore thumb to me, and I was adamant that he's going to be overdrafted, and he's very much proven me wrong to this point, as you all probably have guessed. Ja Morant. He had an ADP of 39. He had a white hot start to the season, but he has, and he's definitely fallen off a little bit since then. I mean, he's now ranked 46, which I guess I'd still be somewhat, I guess, correct in that I was saying that he was overdrafted, but I do think that there's a possibility that he can hit this ADP this year. I'm not totally bought in on that notion, though. I think some of the criticisms that I had are not criticisms, because I love Ja Morant. I'm not trying to knock him or anything, but just from a reality standpoint, similar to Luka, poor percentages, high turnovers. But unlike Luka, in the past, Morant has had no three-point shot, and the defensive stats have been somewhat similar to his, but just nothing, to write home about. This season, Morant's averaging 25 points per game. His steals are up to 1.7 per game, which is a massive jump from where it's been in the past. 50% shooting from the floor, essentially on 19.6 shots per game. Turnovers and free throw percentages are still hurting him. But, I mean, look, we all know that he's a star, and he's going to, at a certain point, he has the tools to really be a consistent top 30 player at some point. Do you think it's going to be this year, Adam, or do you think that the drop-off we've seen from Morant in the last week or so is going to be the first couple of weeks, do you feel that was more just a hot start that he is now cooling off from?
He's an interesting one. I mean, he would be the name on this list for me as well. Darren Fox is possibly another one.
Yeah.
And I don't have him anywhere, so I'm okay with not having him anywhere because
Morant or Fox.
Either,
Yeah.
but Morant I don't have.
Yeah.
Like I think with a lot of these guys, you could somewhat safely give a range and say, okay, I'm 90% sure they're going to finish in sort of between 25 and 45. So you could give a range of about 20 ranks. and say, yeah, look, Jaylen Brown, he's probably going to finish around this area. Pretty safely, you could say that. For Morant, I think you could say he could finish anywhere from 30 to 130.
Yeah, you could.
Because of what he's done in the past and what he's been doing this season. And for me, I think this is where he is now. So he's 45th now. I think he probably still drops a little bit more. And I think just what we've seen, because I mean, a week ago, 10 days ago, he was a first round player. So we've seen just from a couple of off games or games that weren't up to the level of his early season games, he's fallen 2-3 rounds already. So it won't take long for him to continue that slide. And the reason he has been where he's been is because he's made significant improvements to certain categories. And we don't see that a lot. We don't see players take massive leaps in one season. It happens. Brandon Ingram is always the example that you sort of come back to. He took those massive steps a couple of years ago. So, yeah, look, I don't know. I think this is probably his ceiling where he is now, around 40, and that's where he was being drafted. So that's probably the best you're going to hope for. But I'm not convinced he finishes inside the top 50.
I believe in one of the projecting the top 100 videos I did this season, I made my guess that he'd finish as a top 80 player, maybe somewhere between 75 and 80.
Yeah.
So that's, look, I mean, and you know, that was me being optimistic given where he had been in the past. So maybe he'll exceed that. I still feel it's a possibility that he still lines up in that range as well. So I still don't feel that bad about suggesting that people pass over him this year. I assume that you don't either. Well, just given where we are time-wise, I mean, we've covered about 40 players worth. We'll do another series like this where we revisit some of our predictions. But let's jump into some fantasy basketball questions that y'all have. Drop them in the comments. We will see how many we can get to. We're just going to roll with them. We'll see how many we can get to right now. And we'll kick things off with. Let me get rid of this banner here, right there. All right, time for Q&A. Aussie Luke leads us off with his first questions. What are our thoughts on TJ Warren, his role and expected return? Now, Adam, has there been any news about a Warren return? Because I'm pretty sure he's still out indefinitely with the same foot injury that kept him out basically all of last season. The setback is still kind of in effect, and that alone is just kind of, deeply concerning for whatever role he could jump back into whenever he is healthy, if he's still recovering at this point. What are your thoughts on Warren?
Yeah, look, we haven't had a lot. I think we did get an update that he's out of his walking boot, potentially in the last 24, 48 hours. I think there was something that came out. So, that's a step in the right direction, but we still don't have a timeline. I think they may have said weeks as opposed to months, but that could mean 6 weeks as opposed to 2 or 3 months. So it's still, I don't think it's sort of right around the corner by any means. Yeah. I think maybe similar to Zion, we're looking at sort of mid-December, best case. I don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty with TJ. When he does come back, they're going to be careful with him because, this has been his most severe injury, but he's not a player that's... He's had his fair share of injuries throughout his career, most notably concussions and head-related injuries as well. So they're going to be careful with him when he comes back. I think he's a top 100 player when he's out there. And I've got him in a couple of IR spots, but I did actually drop him in one league. I had him in an IR spot, but I just had a couple of guys on my roster that were injured, and I needed to get bodies on the floor. So I think I dropped him and moved D'Angelo Russell into an IR spot so that I could stream someone in. So I think I think either way is fine. I don't think he's sort of going to be a guy that you drop and then regret it. Like he goes back to being a top 40, top 50 player. I don't think that'll happen. I think as I said, I think he'll have value, but there's too much uncertainty to make him a sort of a must-stash player at this stage.
And in particular, from my point of view, just because of how long, because of the injury setback, because of how long he's been shelved, and since the last time he played, Indiana has added some pretty potent options at the wing with Karis LeVert and Chris Duarte, who continues to play really well as a rookie. I mean, they have avenues to limit Warren's minutes to slowly ramp him up into game shape. They're not gonna bring him out and give him a starting role in the 30s. I can't imagine whenever he can come back. I just think that he might be one of those guys who finds his rhythm and comes up to starts playing big down the stretch of the season. But I have a feeling that people who are squatting on him right now are going to be ultimately disappointed once he comes back, is my prediction. I just think that Indiana has no incentive to rush or to give him a large role when he returns. So that I think you could stash him in an IR spot, but like Adam just said, citing an example from his team, don't feel a need to just keep him there at all costs. I mean, it's not, there isn't much guarantee that we can assure you for fantasy value this year. Next question from Tama. What about the Suns? I just traded for Ayton, and there seems to be all these injuries and rumors surrounding the situation in Phoenix. Now, Phoenix, there's one of the big stories from this week, obviously, was that big piece from ESPN about Robert Sarver's ownership. And that's the type of thing that, as investigations continue, is a story that's not going to go away. There is an element in which that can hang over a team. But in particular, if we're just being, let's just get down to brass tacks here. None of these players are going to really fall off in a significant way because of that, even if they're asked, constantly ad nauseum. I don't think it's really going to weigh on them. The leg injury for Ayton, I don't know much about it. Adam, maybe you could fill me in if you have more of a read on it, but I know that he's likely to miss his next game coming up. Ayton has actually been a relatively durable player, though, throughout most of his career to this point. And I still am going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's young and athletic enough to be able to make it back from particular injuries quicker than others. And I'm not worried about his contract status either. I think I've brought that up at another video at a certain point in time. But I mean, Ayton's going to get his money, it doesn't really matter who it's from. I mean, the Suns are ultimately going to sign him to what should be a max contract in this offseason. So I don't know. Is there any concern about the situation in Phoenix bleeding into their play performance on the court, or the Ayton situation in particular? Do you think that this injury is sort of a cause for concern?
No, I mean, the all the external stuff that's going on, I'm not too. I mean, obviously, it's a serious thing that's come up and needs to be dealt with and that sort of thing. But in terms of impacting the players, I don't think it will. The injury is interesting because, yeah, he was out, then he played, then he was out, and now he's potentially going to be out for the next game. There hasn't been a lot of clarity on what it is other than just leg soreness. And so while it doesn't seem as though it's going to be a sort of a multi-game issue, is this something that lingers throughout the season? Potentially. But again, my concern isn't too high. That's also possibly because I just didn't draft him anywhere, so it doesn't impact me directly. I think he was, going back to what we talked about before, he probably was slightly overdrafted, not enough to warrant talking about, but I think people were just remembering how good he was in the playoffs last season. But I think for Ayton, and I mean, this is true for quite a number of players, I think his on-court value actually outweighs his fantasy value to some degree.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Because he's quite a good defensive presence, but doesn't get a lot of defensive production. And he's efficient from the floor. He gets lots of dunks and that sort of thing. So he's very important to the team. But yeah, it doesn't always translate to fantasy. So I think in the playoffs last year, where he was playing really well and he was a difference maker, we weren't playing fantasy at that point, really, unless you were in a playoff league. So you were just looking at his numbers and his impact and the storylines and that sort of thing, going, oh man, he's breaking out. This is it. But if you actually look at his numbers in the playoffs compared to the regular season, there wasn't a massive difference. And last season he was only a top 60 player or something. He wasn't sort of this top 20 breakout guy. So yeah, he was going a little bit high. Yeah, I mean, depending on what you traded for him, I wouldn't worry too much. I think he's still a big part of what they're doing, and he'll be fine. But the injury is something to just keep an eye on.
Yeah. I mean, look, I would, at least for the, I mean, not to get too much into like our previous conversation, but I would give Ayton at least some benefit in that the second half of his season really was in that like top 30 range. It did translate into the playoffs as well, but I think that there was a learning curve with Chris Paul in particular, like for just his role offensively. Really, like, you know, we saw him hit a level of consistency that, you know, I think that he's still going to maintain when he's healthy. I think that he's still someone I'd be targeting to trade for, depending on who your return is. But like, I don't think that he's necessarily, you know, depending on if this is an issue that is behind him relatively, you know, soon. I can still see him contending for top 40 value this year, just by virtue of the, you know, I think that, you know, he's a traditional big man stats kind of guy. He's still one of the best in the league in rebounds and field goal percentage in particular. I think his free throws are down a little bit below their percentage mark from years past. So I think that there's still some room for growth there as well, should he get back out there. I will say one thing about the Suns that I'm still going to be monitoring is just this notion that they're coming off of this championship run with very little turnaround. At what point do we see some of these older veterans start to suffer from that a little bit? Like, we've seen this in Milwaukee pretty much immediately from the start of the season. Both Drew Holiday and Brook Lopez were basically, they played one game each, and then they're like incapacitated with different injuries. You know, Chris Paul is a guy that he was falling lower than he should have in drafts this season because everyone was concerned that this guy's 36 and is 2 months off of an NBA Finals run. Like, you know, at what point do the wheels fall off for him? Jay Crowder's another guy who has played back-to-back NBA Finals in 2 seasons with short off seasons. Does he fall off at some point? As far as my concerns, big picture for the Suns, it's just a matter of like wear and tear. At what point does that all catch up to them? And perhaps this injury with Ayton might be some residue from that. But that's the one thing I'm going to keep monitoring in that Phoenix situation is just, you know, how are they going once they get to the mid-season? How are they going to handle their vets and may prevent injuries going forward here? Eric asks us, and just as a reminder, Adams or Whiteside in all caps. League format is definitely important, but you can tell us if it's tell us what league size or format it is. But let's just go ahead and answer this from a categories perspective. In a 9-cat league, I'm still leaning Steven Adams, who has definitely fallen off from where he started the season on, like, you know, this torrid pace. But Adams is still playing at a top 100 clip. He is the starter unquestionably in Memphis. You know, he's gotten a good collection of boards, field goal percentage, and a nice trickle of out of position assists as well. I still think that he has an inside track to top 120 value this year, whereas Whiteside is, you know, he's gonna get added in mass because he'll have games where he'll block like 5, 6 shots off the bench, and you know he has that permanent upside. But he's Rudy Gobert's backup, and unless Rudy Gobert is injured, there's just no consistency that I'd ever be able to rely on with him. So I mean, in a category league, Adam, what's your lean?
Yeah, again, yeah, as you said, it in context it could be different if it's depending on punt and format and all that sort of stuff. But just generally speaking, if both were available on the waiver, which I'd be surprised if Adams was, but maybe he is. But if you're just picking between one or the other, I would go with Adams. But I did pick up Whiteside in a league, but again, it's a league where I'm punting guard stats, so I don't need assists, I don't need threes, I don't need points. So all I want him to do is get blocks and rebounds and hit his shots, and he'll do that. And in terms of where they end, value-wise at the end of the season, they could be very similar, but only because blocks are so important and sway rankings so much. So if you're after blocks, Whiteside is the choice. Anything else, it's probably Adams.
Yeah, I'd say that. And I think that holds true for pretty much most league formats, unless you're in a points league where blocks are valued at 5 points a piece or something like that.
Yeah.
Which I don't know why you'd be in a points league like that. Sounds precarious. Next question from I'll call you Supreme. Thoughts on Cole Anthony's production so far? Do you think this season may be his breakout, and can he sustain it even when the Magic are fully healthy? I'm not sure what my read is on this one yet because I haven't watched a ton of Magic games yet, but Cole Anthony's, I think he's definitely established himself as their most reliable scorer up to this point. And that is probably something that I'll maintain even if when Jonathan Isaac comes back, who's really like the big domino here. I don't think Markelle Fultz is all that much of a threat to his playing time. I mean, he still could be. I know they made an investment in Fultz, but I think Suggs and Anthony have proven to be more reliable contributors at the NBA level to this point. So I think that Anthony could potentially hold, he's going to keep starting, and he might go to like maybe a 1A, 1B offensive role with Orlando. But Adam, what are your thoughts on Cole Anthony so far? Are you buying into this?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to know. Last season, he was handed the starter's role when Fultz went down, and he was a guy that you sort of went, oh, well, I'll just pick him up because he's going to be playing 30 minutes and we'll see what happens. And he was okay. He didn't sort of blow the roof off or anything, but he did enough. And then coming into this season, I think it was much the same. It was sort of like, well, he's probably going to be a top 150, top 130 player until Fultz is back, and then he'll just fade into obscurity a little bit. But he's been really good. Whether I buy exactly what he's doing now long term, I probably don't. But chances are you got him off waiver wire. I don't think he was drafted in too many leagues. And if it was with a last round pick or something like that. So I would just be holding him and just sort of riding it out. Fultz is going to come back. They're going to ramp him up. He could sit back-to-backs. Realistically, I mean, Anthony could be the starter for the rest of the year, even though Fultz will come back. The Magic, I don't think, are going to be pushing. I mean, potentially they're pushing for the 10th spot, but I doubt it. No
reason to.
Yeah, I don't think. No, so I don't think they will. So, yeah, look, I don't think he'll be. What is he? He's a top 50 guy or something. Just having a look at what he is.
I mean, look, to his credit too. I'll kick it back to you briefly here. But aside from the scoring stuff, I mean, when I picked him up from different stretches last year, he has this rebounding and assists counting stat game that does translate. I mean, so I think that if the efficiency holds up, then he is probably a pretty easy top 70 player on the season. But I mean, you're asking that he maintains. I mean, he's not even that efficient right now. It's just that the three ball is in particular, averaging 3 per game. I don't have the percentages in front of me, but I mean, he's shooting 42% from the floor. I have to imagine that 3-point percentage is quite a deal higher than that. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, so I'll kick it back to you, Adam. What were you going to finish up?
No, I was just looking at his ranking there, and then just had a chance to look at his numbers, and I mean, nothing there is super unsustainable. I mean, he's, as you said, he's 42%. That's sustainable because it's not that good.
It's not even that good.
He's under a steal a game. So I think just if you're out there, you're going to get a steal if you're a guard. So that's probably sustainable. It's probably just the scoring. I mean, he's at 19 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
Can he hold that? Maybe. I mean, again, it's not like he's at 25 points a game. So, yeah. Look, I mean, maybe there's a couple of things change there, but 7.5 rebounds, that's going to be the one that does come down. I mean, that seems really high, but
it's a little unreasonable.
It is, but I mean, he seems to be sort of, he reads the ball quite well off the basket in terms of grabbing rebounds. They like getting the ball in his hands so he can start the fast break. So, yeah, look, sustainable, maybe not, but I don't see why he can't be a top 100 player.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement there. And I think that I'll reiterate, Markelle Fultz is going to have to work for his role at this point. I don't think that it's assumed that Suggs and Anthony take a step back behind Fultz. So that is not the injury that would concern me. It'd be more so if Jonathan Isaac comes back and starts taking 17 shots per game, which is possible. But otherwise, I think Anthony's found himself in a pretty good situation. We'll end things here with Tama chiming in, telling us about the details of the trade. He gave up LaMelo Ball and Al Horford for Zach LaVine and Ayton in 8-cat roto. Adam, with that context applied, how do you feel about that deal?
That's probably okay. I think it's pretty fair. I think LaMelo is the best there, the best player in the trade.
Mm-hmm.
But
he sold high on Horford, I guess, to get Ayton in return.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yep.
in 8-cat. In 8-cat, I mean, those two, I imagine Ayton still finishes ahead of Horford when all is said and done. I think that I would lean LaMelo, though, being the best of those 4 players by season's end. I think that the pace that LaMelo's on is pretty real. It lines up with what he was doing last year in the time frame when he became the starter in Charlotte and before his wrist injury. He was a top 25 player then in 9-cat and probably even higher in 8-cat. So, yeah, I think that ultimately, in the end, I mean, depending on how your team build is oriented, I mean, LaVine and Ayton provide quite a good bit of balance. I mean, you're sacrificing some assists for sure in that deal. So maybe if you're like punting assists or just sort of neglecting them intentionally, then I think that benefits your side a little bit more as well. But otherwise, it's a fair trade, I think, and one that you'll ultimately be satisfied with by the end of the year.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, LaMelo, as we said, he's the best player there, but I think LaVine and Ayton are probably the second and third. So, I think it's a fine trade.
Well, thank you for your questions today, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. As always, this was Srochi and the King, a hoop ball presentation. Subscribe to the Hoop Ball YouTube page while you're here. We got videos coming later this month as well. Adam and I will always do our live shows on the channel every Sunday on YouTube as well. So if you want to be a part of the show, get your questions answered live on air, and just be around for the fun. Always worth tuning in. Keep an eye out as well for the Fantasy Fast Break hosted by Eric Ong. His next episode releases on Monday. Check that out. You definitely want to get his fantasy knowledge delivered to your screen in 24 minutes or less. He's very excited to have that going with him as well. So, Adam, it was great checking in with you again. I hope I will still be a champion next week as well, so I'm going to be very excited about that. I hope you enjoy your rest of your morning, man, and we'll talk soon.
No worries, mate. Have a good afternoon, evening.
Yeah, afternoon. The sun's about to go down though, so we'll see.
All right.
But
okay, catch you later.
Take it easy, everyone.